Okay, I'm going to get started now. It's shortly after 8. Thank you for joining us this morning, everyone. This session right now is a question and answer session on the vacation rental review project that applies to electoral areas A, C, D, E, F, and I. And this is for RDUS file number X2024.017-zone. Okay, and just before we get started, a couple housekeeping notes on the question and answer session format this morning. So just a few notes. This is an informal session, and really the intent of this is an opportunity for residents to ask staff questions about the proposed bylaws so that they are adequately informed in order to provide feedback later this morning at the public hearing. So just bearing that in mind, any comments on the proposed bylaws should be held off on until the public hearing. That is the appropriate venue to provide opinions and feedbacks on the proposed bylaws. Similarly, any questions on the bylaws should be reserved for this Q&A session right now, not the intent of the public hearing for that to be a Q&A format. Lastly, our IT department has just advised me that there is limitations with WebEx this morning. We will need to transition the meeting online into the public hearing shortly before 9. So just recognizing that there will be a hard cutoff for online questions at 8:45. Just bearing that in mind, I will try to prioritize online questions earlier in the meeting, but I will continue taking questions in person in the room here right up until 9 a.m. For anyone participating online, if you would like to ask questions after my short presentation here, you will need to indicate that you would like to speak by raising your hand. You can do this by either hitting the participants icon in the bottom right of your screen and then hovering over your name, and there's a little hand icon that you can click. That'll let us know here in the room that you would like to speak, and we will take you in turn. If you're calling in by phone, you can do the equivalent by pressing *3. That'll indicate that you've raised your hand and will flag to us that you have a question. And before I get into this slide, I'll just apologize in advance. This is a very brief and high-level summary of the project status and timeline, but just recognizing that there were some questions around process and how we ended up with the proposed bylaws that are here today. So this project does date back to 2023. It was on the Regional District Board's business plan for that year. However, shortly after October 2023, the province introduced new legislation, and this was the Short-Term Rental Accommodations Act. And so in light of that new legislation, that did prompt a bit of a pivot. Multiple areas did opt into what is called a principal residence requirement under that act in March of 2024. And then following that, there were a number of workshops held between the Regional District Board and staff in spring 2024, and then again in April of this year to flesh out the scope of these proposed bylaws. Following that, proposed project scopes were formulated in December of last year, and then a revised version in May and again in August of this year. On each of those project scopes, public information meetings were held, so that the original project scope would have been February and March of this year, and then for the revised project scope, that was held in June. And then the last step was the public hearing on September 4th, which was recessed and will reconvene just after the Q&A session at 9 a.m. this morning. And so just in very simple terms, thinking back to that last slide with the workshops and some of the discussions between staff and the Regional District Board, the very simple gist of that discussion was this question: should short-term rental accommodations be permitted within each electoral area? And if so, what's the manner in which they should be regulated? And so staff came with 3 different options that we saw as viable options to regulate this type of use in the electoral areas. And these were the options that at a very high level were selected for each of the electoral areas. So option 2, as you see here, permitting short-term rentals as a permitted use as of right in the zoning bylaw, was chosen by areas D, F, and I. Some of those also chose to regulate short-term rentals through a business license. Area F did not. Option 3 that you see there, the creation of a short-term rental permit. Essentially what this is a more streamlined version of the existing temporary use permit that is used in the electoral areas presently for vacation rental uses. And so this was the option that was selected by areas A, C, and E. And again, some of these areas also chose to regulate using a business license. Area C did not. And so just moving on to the bylaws that are the subject of the public hearing later today, there's two bylaws really. That's the Official Community Plan Amendment Bylaw number 3099 and the Okanagan Valley Zoning Amendment Bylaw number 2800.50. So in the next couple slides, I'm just going to go through the key points that are the new policy and regulation changes in these proposed amendment bylaws. So starting with the OCP amendment bylaw, the first change is replacing existing vacation rental policies with new policies that support short-term rental accommodation. And thinking back to my previous slide, in recognition that areas D, F, and I opted into that provincial principal residence requirement, there is policy language being introduced that reflects that. For electoral area E, while area E did not opt into the provincial principal residence requirement, there is the same policy language supporting short-term rentals in a principal residence for that area. The second change that's being proposed for the OCP amendments is the deletion of existing vacation rental temporary use permit policies. And this is in recognition that in areas A, C, and E, this is being replaced by a short-term rental permit policy. Whereas for areas D, F, and I, there will be no permit policies within the OCP. And so these short-term rental permit policies that are being added in place of the existing temporary use permit policies for areas A, C, and E, these would support allowing short-term rentals through the issuance of what will be called a short-term rental permit. And these permits will be subject to the following criteria being met in order to be issued. So the first criteria is that it would need to occur in a residential dwelling unit. The second criteria is that a maximum of 2 short-term rentals would be permitted per parcel, although the caveat to that is that in area E, the maximum would be 1. The third criteria is that a maximum occupancy of 2 guests per bedroom would be permitted. The fourth criteria is that 1 parking space per bedroom would be required. And then the fifth criteria would be that the short-term rental would need to meet minimum health and safety requirements. Just jumping ahead in my slides, sorry. The third OCP amendment that's being proposed is in the introduction of new tourist accommodation policies. So this policy would state that proposals that are not consistent with the short-term rental policies would be considered tourist accommodation uses, and there would be policy language discouraging tourist accommodation uses in dwellings. Although in recognition that for any land use regulations, there is a formal appeal process in the form of a land use application to the Regional District Board, there would be policy language added indicating that should such applications be submitted, that they would be preferred in the form of a temporary use permit. And I've included this slide just to illustrate some recent examples from applications received by the regional district of what would be considered tourist accommodation and not a short-term rental. So these are generally uses that are either not occurring in a dwelling or are not related to a residential use of the property. So this could include things like RVs, tents, tourist cabins, but it could also include uses of dwellings that are not residential in nature, such as there being no residential use whatsoever in a dwelling unit during any part of the year, as well as modifications of a dwelling unit that are not residential in nature. Moving on to the proposed zoning bylaw amendment, The first change that's proposed in this bylaw is the replacement of two existing use classes in that bylaw with a new short-term rental accommodation use class. And this is in recognition that these two use classes are being recognized as short-term rental accommodation by the new provincial legislation. And so the intent here is to make the language match up. So these two use classes are bed and breakfast and vacation rental. And really, the main difference between these use classes right now in the bylaw is whether there is a resident on site and living in the same dwelling unit as guests while the dwelling is being rented out. The second proposed change in the zoning bylaw amendment is to permit short-term rental accommodation in all zones that currently allow for a bed and breakfast. And in other words, this is currently permitted in all zones that allow for a single detached dwelling. The third change being proposed in the zoning amendment bylaw is to apply the following density regulations to short-term rental uses. So in areas A, C, D, and I, a maximum of 2 short-term rentals would be permitted per parcel. In areas E and F, it's proposed to allow 1 short-term rental per parcel. And in the medium density residential, town, village center, and comprehensive development zones, there would be no maximum applied. However, effectively what this would mean is that 1 short-term rental would be permitted per dwelling unit permitted by the zoning. And this is generally in recognition that these zones listed here would allow for multifamily residential uses where you may have multiple dwelling units occurring per parcel. The fourth change being proposed by the zoning amendment bylaw is to apply the following miscellaneous land use regulations to short-term rental uses. So the first is that a maximum of 2 guests would be permitted per bedroom. The second is that a minimum of 1 parking space would be required per bedroom. The third would be to permit year-round short-term rental, provided that at least 1 dwelling on the property is used for residential purposes. In areas A, C, and E, there is further a requirement proposed that a resident must be present and residing in the principal dwelling unit during a patron stay, except as authorized by a short-term rental permit. And essentially what this provision is trying to accomplish is to maintain and uphold the historic distinction between bed and breakfast uses and vacation rental uses. As I just mentioned, the only difference currently between those two is whether there is a resident on site and in the same dwelling unit as guests during operation. The last requirement being proposed in the zoning amendment bylaw is just in recognition that these regulations for short-term rental uses may in some cases exceed what is permitted by the ALR. And so this last provision would indicate that where there is a conflict between the regional district zoning bylaw and the ALR use regulations, that the higher standard being applied by the regional district would only apply if approval has been received from the Agricultural Land Commission where required. And while this bylaw is not the subject of the public hearing later this morning, I recognize that there have been a fair number of questions about the relationship between the two, between the land use regulations and the new business licensing regulations. And so I've just included a quick summary of the proposed and current business license changes. Some of these have already been adopted in the form of the business license bylaw, and some of these changes here are included in an amendment that will be on the regular board agenda later today for adoption. So just in quick summary of what the final outcome would look like if that bylaw is adopted later today, the business license requirement does not apply to areas C and F. It would not apply to Apex Mountain Resort area, and it would also not apply to bed and breakfast operations in area A or area D. So where there's a resident on site in the same dwelling unit as guests during operation in areas A and D, there would be no business license requirement. The second main component of the business license bylaw is the annual fee. So for short-term rental uses, that fee is $500 annually. For tourist accommodation uses, only in Area E, there is a $200 fee for a different business license. And the third change is that for short-term rental application requirements, There would be four main requirements to be included with that application. The first is a parking plan. Second is a health and safety inspection. The third is a fire evacuation plan. And the fourth is a floor plan. And really the intent here is this would facilitate staff reviewing the proposed short-term rental use against existing regional district bylaws and allow staff to confirm that the use does in fact comply with our bylaws before the permit is issued. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions. Again, just starting with online questions before we move over to in-person questions.
I'm just going to jump in here. My name is Eric Thompson. I'm with Communications and Engagement here at the RDOS. And I see here that we do have a question from one of the area directors. Are we taking questions from directors at this point? I'm assuming that's appropriate. So we have Director Coyne from Electoral Area H online. So I'll hand it over to you, Ben.
Go ahead, Director Coyne.
Good morning. I got one question that's kind of nagging at for a long time when we talk about the traditional B&Bs versus the short-term rental ones. Now, in past, a bed and breakfast operation also was subject to inspections by Interior Health for kitchen facilities because of the breakfast portion of it. Because we're not calling it a B&B anymore, does that still apply?
Yeah, so currently the regional district zoning bylaws indicate that a bed and breakfast use may serve meals as part of the accommodation, but it's not a requirement. And so that's not something that's regulated by the regional district, and that would continue not being regulated by the regional district. So that's not something that we would be looking at.
Oh, these are the wrong glasses.
I'm going to jump in again if I can. Just in speaking with Chris Garish, who is with the planning department, at this time it would be ideal to have the questions just going to the public, members of the public, and we'll ask our board members if they can hold off for just a few minutes because we certainly don't want to take up the opportunity for members of the public to ask questions. And I'm not seeing any in the chat. I'm not sure if we have any online questions. I'm not sure if you can see any back there. There are some hands up, so I don't see them on my screen. Go ahead.
Let's see if there's any questions in
It's Chris Garrett.
Yeah, and I just want to remind you as well, we're trying to get as many online questions as we can early in the process because we have to transition to the next meeting. So we're hoping if there are any online, but let's go to this in-person one, and then we may have to ask Adam to alert us to when the online questions are and how we can find those people.
Name is Fred Hossman. I live in Naramata, and it's not my primary resident, but apparently there is still going to be a TUP process for people that are non-residents. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And on the presentation here on the PowerPoint, it didn't mention this extra $2,500 fee, which is an application fee. Is that correct? Like you have your $200 ST or business license, and then you have a $2,500 temporary use permit application fee. That language is still in there, is it not?
So the proposed bylaws would apply a $500 fee for a short-term rental permit application. But in recognition of that policy that I indicated, the principal residence requirement in Area E, what that would look like is that staff may not be able to support the application. However, it would advance to the regional district and they would have the ability to consider the application still. So my understanding is it still would be a $500 fee.
Plus the 2,500, correct? No?
No.
Okay, so this is incorrect. No, that's if you want a motor home or a outbuilding. That's a 1,250 fee. That's what it says here. So I guess that leads me into, apparently currently there are 14 TUPs that are in force or active, and those are grandfathered until they expire, right? So in continuation of those, they would have to go through some sort of a process, correct? So that's where I'm going, is which process, is it going to be completely denied, or is there an avenue for those non-resident homeowners?
Well, look, so staff can't speak to decisions that the board may or may not take on specific applications. I mean, we can speak to the
Right.
policy that we're being given to assess an application against, and if it meets that policy, we will recommend in favor, and if it doesn't, it may be that we recommend against, but what the board decides to do that with that recommendation, we can't speak
No,
to.
I'm not asking for what the board's going to decide. I'm just saying, is there a process?
Yeah.
And is there a cost for the process? So is this $2,500 charge that she has in this column here under temporary use permit real, or is it $1,250, or is it no?
So the business license fee is 500, and then the STR permit fee, I believe, is 1,250, correct? I got that right?
The 1,250 fee. No. Excuse me, the 1,250 fee is for tourist accommodation uses. Non-delegated temporary use permits.
So if we can go to the online questions right now.
So I see we have a number of hands up. I can see the list now. Karen Moore is online. So Adam, is that? Pardon? Adrian queued up? Okay, go ahead, Adrian, then.
Oh, hi. And thank you for the opportunity to speak. So the August 7th proposed bylaw, I mean, it clearly states that, the principal residence requirement applies to Area E. And thank you for setting this out, Ben, but the recent Hot Topics information release purposely excluded Area E from the principal residence requirement. So it made it a little unclear for me, but by the sounds of things today, the principal residence requirement is going to be required in Electoral E. That's correct, right?
Stand by for just a moment, please, Adrian. Did you catch that question, Ben? It was about principal residence requirement for Electoral Area E, whether that is required.
And sorry, when you say is that required, do you mean by the provincial legislation or just in terms of the OCP policy? Yeah, so what is being proposed for Electoral Area E is an official community plan policy indicating that a short-term rental use is only supported in a principal residence. And so depending on the form of the application, if that's what's currently called like a bed and breakfast use, that would be confirmed at the point of business license application. If what's currently called a vacation rental use, that would, under the new regime, require a short-term rental permit, and that would be the point at which that requirement is confirmed.
So if it's not your principal residence, you can apply for a short-term rental permit, which kind of replaces the traditional TUP.
That's
so it's going to be a less stringent criteria, but there's going to be additional criteria over and above the standard business licenses that we see. So there is opportunity for non-principal residents to continue operating short-term rental accommodations in Electoral E.
There's always the opportunity for residents to apply and seek approval through that application process. But however, as Mr. Garish just indicated, we can't advise how the regional district board might decide on those applications. They would be
So even
considered
if
on
you
an
meet all the
individual basis.
So even if you meet all the criteria, you know, it's not necessary that your application is going to be unreasonably denied, or could it be reasonably denied?
So if I can just add to that, I think like from staff's perspective, if we're being told in electoral area E that one of the criteria that we need to assess these applications, which are discretionary, so they do require board approval, is the applicant a principal residence on the property? And if the applicant has indicated that they are not, but we are being told at a staff level that that's a consideration that we should be taking into account when we do our assessment, it may be that our recommendation would be to deny the application. Doesn't say it's denied automatically. It obviously then has to go to the board, and the board would review the specifics of the proposal and make a final determination as to whether they're going to approve it or not.
And are we going to get an opportunity to speak to this in the next session?
So sorry, I missed Ben's presentation, but I just want to reiterate for everybody here that a question and answer session is an informal process. And so we're happy to take questions, discuss items, try to provide a clarification. But when we transition into the public hearing, which is a statutory requirement for a formal bylaw amendment, it's not a debate or a venue for discussion. It's an opportunity for residents to stand up and to state clearly if they oppose or support the bylaw, and if they choose to provide reasons, that's great. But there'll be no more questions and discussion during the public hearing.
But we'll have an opportunity to voice our opinions at that time, is what you're saying.
State your position for or against the proposed amendments, yes.
Okay, and then so just one last question for here, because I'd asked it in the last meeting, and it you know, it wasn't really a clear response. So I did a little bit of homework. I just want to make sure that the existing rationale for the principal residence requirement is based on returning homes to people because of lack of long-term rental accommodations, noise, parking, and neighborhood character. Is that correct?
I'm not able to confirm that because we at a staff level were given direction by the board to introduce this policy into electoral area E, and so that's what we've done in the amendment bylaw.
And with that, I'm going to jump in if I can. We're trying to keep each of our questions to approximately 3 minutes because we do have quite a queue of people. I'm going to ask Adam, who is operating the technology in the background, who we're going to next.
So not answering that question.
And we're going to go to Karen next.
Tricky question.
That's Karen Moore. Go ahead, please. You'll have to unmute yourself, Karen, please.
Are you there? Sorry about that. Zone C, we're brand new to this area, brand new to even having a B&B. We have a B&B that is attached to, we call it a guest house. It's attached to our home. We live here the whole time. We have a tenant, I'm gonna call her that. From time to time, they're like 3 months, 6 months at a time. Am I subject to a permit?
Yeah, so if you live in electoral area C, that is one of the areas that is implementing a short-term rental permit. And so really what that is it's intended to be a more streamlined form of an existing permit requirement that we have. And so in that case, to rent out like a secondary suite or an accessory dwelling that you're not living in for guests, it would be an application to the regional district, and then it would be evaluated on the basis of those criteria that I highlighted in my presentation. So that would be things like the maximum occupancy, the parking, health and safety inspection, and providing the floor plan and the, yeah.
And just to confirm that, even though we're all living here and this is like part of our house, it's a room in our, like a extended space in our house, we are subject to this. For sure, like that's what it's saying, because we don't have to do anything right now. I don't have any permitting I need to do. I don't have a business license. I don't require anything right now.
Sorry, this may be something that you would want to confirm with staff offline. Just I'm having difficulty understanding the exact nature of your business operation. There is a difference whether it's a single dwelling unit or two separate ones.
Okay.
And that might be a bit more nuanced than we can sort out here. But effectively for your area, there isn't any new regulatory change they're still maintaining the historic distinction between a bed and breakfast and a vacation rental use. They're being called one use class, but the
Yeah.
requirements would essentially be the same. For the short-term rental permit, the requirements are actually reduced from the current temporary use permit process.
And thank you for your question, Karen. I'm going to jump in again if I can. We're trying to keep this moving on because we do have quite a few questions. And I want to remind people what Ben said is that you're welcome to call staff at any time to get some of the specifics about your area because granted, it is a little bit confusing because there are different requirements for each electoral area. And with that, again, we'll check in with Adam to see who is coming up next online for a question. And it looks, is that Ben? Looks like Ben. Go ahead, Ben. Please don't forget to unmute yourself, please.
Hi, thank you. Two quick questions. One for properties in the ALR that are running short-term rentals under agritourism, where provincial permits have already been obtained or provincial licenses. How is the regional district going to apply some of these regulations, like the principal occupancy or principal residency?
Yeah, so I think there's a few components to your question. For the principal residence requirement, the provincial legislation exempts and excludes land that's within the agricultural land reserve. So there would be no principal residence requirement there. Agritourism accommodation is its own use class, both within the regional district's bylaws and also within the ALR land use regulations. So that would be separate from the short-term rental regulations that we're discussing today. No changes are proposed to the regional district's land use bylaws with respect to that land use. However, if you are in electoral area E, there is a business license that's being proposed that would apply to agritourism accommodations, and that would be that lesser $200 business license fee. And I apologize, I don't think you indicated which area you were in, so that may not apply in your case.
No, I'm in Area E. I'm also the president of the Discover Naramata board, so we have a lot of our members that are asking some of these questions. Other question quickly, some of our bed and breakfast members are trying to get some clarity, where they have 3 or 4 rooms currently operating as a bed and breakfast. Are they now limited to 1 room only in Area E?
No, so those regulations around bedrooms, that's just maximum occupancy. So it's a sliding scale, right? So for each bedroom, there's a maximum occupancy of 2 guests. But when we refer to 1 short-term rental being permitted per parcel, that's the entirety of the short-term rental operation. It's not, each bedroom is not considered its own short-term rental on its own.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, some of our members weren't clear on that, and we're nervous. So thank you for that clarity. That's all I have for questions.
Thank you, Ben. And we'll get another online question here. Just a reminder that at about 8:45, if you're watching this live, we'll be transitioning to just in-person questions, and that's so that we can switch this system over to get prepared for the public hearing and board meeting that will follow. We have Liam on the line now. Liam, please don't forget to unmute yourself and go ahead, please.
Yeah, thanks for letting me speak here. My question, I guess, in concern, I'm also similar to Adrian's. And so he's asked that a couple of times now, and a little concern that it's been sidestepped each time. So there is 3 minutes here for this question that I'd like to get just a bit of the explanation and the thought behind why there is the principal residence requirement. I'm in Area D, and why we have opted into the provincial requirements when smaller areas such as my electoral area would be exempt.
Sure. So I'll try to take this question to the best of my ability. And I want people to understand that it's very difficult for staff to read into the minds of the board when they're making a decision on any particular matter. And so when we get questions asking staff, what was the board thinking when they directed us to do something specific, it's very challenging for us to respond to that. Sometimes we're not fully aware or apprised of the reasons behind the request for changes to bylaws. So we're not sidestepping the question. It's just we're not able to answer this one. I think it came up earlier in relation to Area E. And in relation to Area D, it was following the implementation of the Short-Term Rentals Accommodation Act by the provincial government. And there was a deadline for local governments to request if they wanted to be included in the principal residence requirement, and that was brought forward to this particular board for direction, and we had 3 electoral areas request to be brought in. And staff can't speak to the reasons why those directors requested that, but that was the request. We did the paperwork, submitted it to the province, and the province agreed to apply the principal residence requirements to electoral areas D, F, and I, as I recall. So
I can appreciate that it's difficult for people not involved in the decision making to explain the rationale, but it's kind of an important piece to all of this because this is the domino that falls from all of it. And I have been reading through just the community survey, and what is being proposed seems to be in complete contradiction to what the community has voted for or has expressed their opinion on. So that's why we, and I think myself, I don't speak on behalf of Adrian, but really wanting to know the rationale and why the board has gotten to this decision when it seems to be counter to what the community wants.
Okay, I'm going to jump in there, Chris, if I can. Again, my name's Eric. I'm with communications here at the RDOS. Just in the interest of time, we're going to keep going. What we're really trying to do is get
Sorry,
the
I'm
information.
timing this. I still have 30 seconds, so I would like that to be answered, please.
Well,
You
go
said
ahead,
3
Chris.
minutes.
If you have anything else to add, Chris. If you don't have anything else to add, then we'll move on, if you don't mind, sir.
Sorry, I'm not trying to dodge the question, but it's not a fair question to staff. I think I would direct you to talk to your electoral area director.
But when this is being voted on, and this is the open forum, so I'll be expressing my opinion after this at the next meeting.
Yes.
But that's one that has been asked kind of numerous times here and sidestepped each time. And I know the director of the electoral area is on here, so that should be an opportunity for him to respond to that question.
This isn't the forum for that. That's the challenge we're faced with here. This is an information meeting. We happen to have some directors present, but that's simply because we have a public hearing and a board meeting coming up following this meeting in the same room. So we won't be able to bring the directors into the conversation at this point. I think we're going to have to move on. We do have quite a few questions, and I appreciate your questions, Liam, and we'll go to our next online question. It looks like we have Rod. Rod, again, please unmute yourself and go ahead with your question, please. We'll go try again with Rod. Rod, did you have a question? May have a technology issue. We'll just give it another second or two here, and we'll have to move on to the next caller. Okay, maybe we can circle back to Rod. Adam, over on the technology desk there, looks like we have Kathy standing by next, so we'll go to Kathy. Kathy, please unmute your microphone and go ahead with your question to Ben and Chris, please. All right, looks like we're not getting an online question. I think we'll give it one more try there. Again, Adam, if you can give us some direction on that. Otherwise, I don't know if we have any questions in person here. One last chance for Kathy, if you want to give us a try online.
There we go. I think I'm on, right?
Okay. Yeah,
Yes.
thank you so much.
Unmute button was pretty tricky. I'm just curious with the, because the sort of, Area E, the principal residence issue is pretty critical. How will we police that? And is there a fine for, in not properly representing yourself as a resident?
Sorry, I was just checking with Ben to see if we could recall the exact fine. So as part of the suite of amendments that are being proposed, there are changes to the regional district's bylaw notice enforcement bylaw, which is one form of ticketing, and also our municipal ticketing information. One of those bylaws is capped by provincial legislation at a maximum of $500. The other one's capped at a maximum of $3,000 per infraction. Regional district's approach to bylaw enforcement is traditionally through a reactive response to written complaints being submitted. We're not out actively policing. But the business licensing process will help us vet proposals coming through to ensure compliance and consistency with the zoning regs that are up for discussion today. And I think that's basically how we would approach enforcement. So if there are people operating contrary to any of the zoning regs, not just principal residence requirements, we would require a written complaint to be submitted first before we start investigating and taking action.
And the when applying for the top the principal residence aspect of it, how is that determined to be true or untrue?
Yeah, so that would be indicated on the application form that would be declared by the property owner. However, just in recognition that if that information is not accurate, that potentially would be subject to future enforcement. And that would follow the process that Chris had outlined.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we have one more online question. Just take a moment here to get them set up. It looks like we have Steve and Susan. If you could unmute your mic and go ahead with your question, please. And while we're waiting for Steve and Susan to join us online, just a reminder, if anybody in person here has any questions,
can you hear me?
We'll have about 15 minutes if you'd like to come up to the microphone when your opportunity arises. Steve and Susan, go ahead, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, good. I just want a real clear clarification. We attended the last information session. We've posted information to our area director, Adrienne, and we've been on Discover Naramata. We still can't get a clear indication of the fact that we are running right now 2 B&Bs in our home. Can we still run the 2 B&Bs in our home under one STR or whatever it's called? This is in Area E. So I'm really confused about STRs versus bed and breakfast. And I know there's a lot of bed and breakfast in our area where the home has a number of B&Bs, more than one, and we're confused about whether we can still run our 2 B&Bs. So that's yes or no.
Okay, so I'm not sure I followed everything you're saying because it doesn't make sense in the context of our bylaws. A bed and breakfast can only be one per dwelling unit, and it has to be the principal dwelling unit, and it has to be in the same house as your kitchen and other facilities. Like it's a shared concept of tourist accommodation. So when you're telling me that you have multiple B&Bs in a house, it's like that's not possible under the zoning bylaw. So my short answer is no.
Sorry, we have 2 separate bedroom units. They're not connected to each other. So it's not one 2-bedroom rental. It's 2 separate 1-bedroom rentals.
So that's not a B&B. And so in the context of our bylaws, that would be tourist accommodation, and we have separate regs in relation to that.
This is so.
But we've always been allowed. When we built it 10 years ago, we went to the planning department and outlined what we were doing. And it doesn't make any sense if we would be allowed to rent out the whole house, but we're not allowed to rent out 2 separate bedrooms. And
Yeah, but those are the zoning regs that are in place, and our B&B regulations have been in place since the early 1980s. So I would be surprised if that was the advice that you received from the planning department.
Well, then we're all surprised. There's several established or several houses in Area E that are doing the same as us. So I don't understand. We could rent out. We could live in one bedroom.
But sorry, you see the challenge of that statement, though. Like, I don't know what they're doing. And if they're doing the same as you and what you've described to me is not allowed by zoning, then they're potentially not compliant either.
But what we're trying to do is find out, how do we find out the answer? I've emailed to Ben Kemp. We've taken our whole house plan in when we built the house. We've emailed and phoned our area director. We've been on the other question and answer, and we just can't get an answer.
So in order to get a building permit, yes, you would have been required to bring in your house plans when you were constructing it. I understand from Ben that he's already responded to your email queries.
No, he
so I'm not sure what
said
the compute.
He has responded to say he can't speak to our specific situation. So we just want to know, who do we talk to?
Hi, Susan. So yeah, I think this would fall under the same umbrella as the previous person who called in online. Without knowing the exact specifics of how many dwelling units are there? Which ones of those are being rented? Is this rooms within a dwelling unit, or is it separate entire dwelling units? Some of those questions can only be answered by reviewing the exact plans for that structure. And so
who
in
would
prior
do it?
With that,
discussions,
Ben, I'm going to jump in and sorry to interrupt again, Steve and Susan. We really are trying to get as many people in as we can. We have one more call online, Rod, before we have to change this meeting over to in-person only. Apologies to Steve and Susan, but a reminder, please do call in directly to the RDOS and speak with Ben or Chris, or come into the office, because there are some nuances with your specific case that I think it sounds like you'll need a little discussion about. So one more question online, and I believe we have Rod. Is that correct, Adam?
What's
Do we have
the
time for
chances
Rod's
this is
question?
working? Is this working now?
I can hear you. Yeah, go ahead, please.
This just has to do with short-term rentals in a principal residence in Area F. They have a $2,500 TUP application fee now. Is that correct?
The question was about Area F and TUP $2,500 fee.
So in Electoral Area F, the temporary use permit application is not for short-term rentals. It's for all other uses under the zoning bylaw, just in recognition that a TUP is something that is not unique to short-term rentals. It's just a general tool that can be used to approve a land use not permitted by zoning. And so the fee that is established by bylaw for that is $1,250, not $2,500.
I will add that to though, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Ben, but if you're operating something that's not considered a short-term rental, but more akin to a boutique campground or a boutique motel or something along those lines, yeah, you're probably looking at the $2,500 fee as a non-STR use. But if it's STR use in Area F, it's only the business licensing that applies, correct? Yeah, that's correct.
It is a business license that applies. I thought in your slide it said there was no business license in Area F.
My mistake, Ben. Help me out.
Yes, Area F has not is not part of the service establishment bylaw. It is part of the service establishment bylaw, but it does not have a business license for short-term rentals. Apologies.
No problem. You're at
My mistake.
$1,250 then. Is this an annual fee?
For temporary use permits, the legislation does allow that type of approval to be authorized for up to 3 years. So property owners could request any time frame ranging from 1 to 3 years. So it wouldn't be an annual fee. It would be a fee for the duration of that permit.
Okay, this is, okay, I'll leave it at that. This is different information than I got in your office. But thanks for answering.
Thank you, Rod. I just want to confirm with Adam, do we have time for one more online call? I see we have one more person there. So we'll go to in-person now. Okay, we're going to move off of online, so apologies to anyone who is waiting. Again, we have to, here at the RDOS, change this meeting into, we have to get ready for the public hearing, which is coming up next. So we're going to move to just online, or excuse me, in-person questions now. So if anybody in the gallery here has any questions, if you'd like to come up to the microphone, please feel free to ask your questions. If there aren't any, then I will ask Ben and or Chris if they'd like to wrap up the information session with any final thoughts. I can remind you again, if you have specific questions about your home or your property, best to call directly into the office and speak with Ben or Chris and discuss some of the specifics about your property. And again, the public hearing is coming up next, which will be at 9 o'clock. And that will be an opportunity to provide a yes or no how you feel about the issue, but there won't be an opportunity to do the question and answer back and forth as that's not in the legislation. Any closing thoughts, Ben? In-person question or online? Oh, in-person, sorry, yeah. Just make sure you turn on the mic, please, sir. Thank you.
Okay. I'd noticed that 2 areas do not require a business license. Area E has now opted in for a business license. Can anybody tell me what the implications are of having a business license when you sell the property as far as capital gains goes? And who makes the decision about?
We can't.
Yeah,
we don't deal with capital gains. That's not a land use consideration for us. I have no. So he's asking about capital gains. Like, we can't answer that question.
The implications of requiring a business license I don't know if anybody's looked into it, but our concern is that when we go to sell the property, you lose your principal residence status because of that. And so that is a big concern, because the little bit of money that we make out of a short-term rental compared to what we could lose in capital gains, because now we are a business. We have a business license, so this property is now considered a business.
So normally when we get these questions at these types of meetings, it's in relation to a permit. And so for a land use permit, the permit always goes with the property, not with the owner, right? Because it's being issued on the basis of the merits of the use or the development that's being proposed. With a business license, and sorry, I was just checking with Ben to see if we had it at our fingertips, but we don't. We're not sure if the license would transfer with the property or with the owner, right? So if you're the owner and you sell, does that effectively mean the end of your license and any new operator would have to reapply for a new one? I don't have that answer, but we're happy to follow up. So catch us after this meeting and we can get some details and get back in touch with you on that.
Also, this is a CRA question, because that's something that you, not a regional district question.
Well, the thing is that some areas don't require that. So, you know, at the moment, as far as I can understand, as far as the CRA goes, if you have a short-term rental and it's 1/3 of your house, you might be taxed on 1/3 of that property for capital gains when you go to sell, because you've used 1/3 of your house, and then that should be factored down by the number of months you've used it for short-term rental. But with a business license, I don't feel like the rules have been applied fairly from the start. So I'm not sure if having a business license, your whole property is going to be designated as a business, and then it will all be subject to property gains tax, capital gains tax, sorry.
Yeah, so we can't speak to that.
Yeah.
That's not a fair question. I mean, all I can say is that in the context of our land use bylaws, yeah, a vacation rental is considered a residential use of a property. That's why when we're talking about introducing STRs, we're talking about introducing them into residential zones. I don't envision residential assessment of your property changing.
Is it the board that makes the decision on whether you require the license or not? The
business license?
The business license.
This board, yes.
This board decides. So there's a board for Electoral Area E, and they make that decision.
No,
and then
there's one board.
Okay.
And there's 19 members on it.
Right.
20 members. Area E has one member of those 20 on this board.
And that's the person who opts in on the business license, because Area C and D don't require a business license.
It's always a board decision, right? Area E has one vote on that board. So it's a board decision as to which electoral areas go in and out.
So we're going to ask you
any clarification on why there's a difference that some require and some don't require?
It gets back to my question, or the question I answered earlier. It was a board decision, and staff can't speak to what was going through the director's minds when they made that decision. You have to ask your elected representative.
So we have about go ahead, Jim. We have about 5 minutes left. I just have a note here from Director Gettins about Area F, and she's clarifying that Area F does not require a TUP for short-term rentals. She said that the last question from Area F may have been answered incorrectly, or there may have been misunderstanding about that.
Yeah, apologies if there's any misunderstandings. There is a temporary use permit, as I indicated. That's not a temporary use permit as a tool is not unique to short-term rentals. So there is a temporary use permit. Is it required for short-term rentals? No.
Thank you, Ben. Any other questions here in the gallery? Go ahead, please.
Sorry. I just would like some clarification on how to actually prove that you are primary resident. Like, is it set by number of days? Like, what kind of criteria?
Chris, one of the ways we can check is if you qualify for a homeowner's grant, then you are a primary resident. So we are not a taxing authority, but we will be having the ability to check if you qualified for homeowner's grant. There's a certain amount. If your property is over a certain amount, you don't qualify at all. And then there's other ways of doing it, but there is a way for us to check.
Do you know what those are to qualify for the homeowner's grant? Like, what are those qualifications?
You have to sign a document that the province receives, And one of the things that they check is to make sure that you're not applying for 2 homeowner grants. That you would be caught immediately. So if you qualify for a homeowner's grant, that means the province is saying that they accept that is your primary residence. And it's primary means more than 6 months plus 1 day.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
All right, and just to check final time, any other questions here in the gallery? If so, yeah, please step up to the microphone and just push the button, please. And a reminder that at 9 o'clock, this information meeting will end, and then we will be moving into the public hearing. There won't be an opportunity to ask questions at that time, just to state your opinion. Go ahead, please.
Well, part of what I'd like to know is because you're saying the board, does this and you guys do that. I think a lot of us were in the understanding we were going to be talking more to who is making the actual decisions. I really feel that's what a lot of us thought we were here for. With the meeting coming up, do we have any real input? Because it seems to me like there's a lot of questions still out there. People are not understanding. Are they going to get resolution before this gets voted in? I'm sure you guys are seeing that yourself today, that a lot of people still really do not understand what's going on.
So the short answer is you do get your opportunity at the public hearing. And if you're not happy with the amendment bylaws, you tell the board, I don't support these amendments, and you give them the reasons why. And then that's up to the board to consider that when they make a final decision on giving it third reading or not.
So when is that? Is that today?
Yeah, it's at 9 o'clock.
All of today is going to be.
It's at 9 o'clock.
So today we are going to tell the board, the few people here and the few people phoning in. So where are the real decisions coming from? Just the few people,
Yes.
or you guys have other
So
people that
you've elected a representative who sits on a board of other elected representatives to make these kinds of decisions.